So, I figure I'll play this video because I'm also going to be trying to make this into a segment of sorts. Because there's a lot of misconceptions, there's a lot of confusion about land back. There's and there's some like nasty reactionary nonsense to land back as well. I'm sure if anyone's seen like Voosh, for example, you would know exactly what I'm talking about. So I figure we'll watch this video. Then maybe if I have time, I'll try to read over an excerpt from the Red Deal, going a little bit further into land back. Like it's wild that no one actually tries to research this stuff, and by that I mean like other white people, because like literally you go on YouTube, you type in what is land back, right? And this is like one of the first results you'll get. But no one wants to do that research. It's very simple. But I figure I'll play it just so, like when we get the panel going, there's a clear understanding of what it is and what it is not.
Land back just means so much to me. It means us not putting up with it anymore, not taking it anymore. I've heard the same thing from my grandparents that I heard from my father that I have also experienced in my lifetime.
Hi.
Hey, Viv, what's up?
Systematic
playing Dead by Daylight.
Oh, okay. That's fine.
And the doctor.
Yeah, we got like a half hour.
Doctor's electrifying.
And going forward, if we want
because he has electric powers.
Yeah.
Buff people.
I'm playing a video on land back right now.
Landback is a philosophy.
Understanding from a deep place of
yeah, so people well, I'm gonna make this into a segment, so
it's not just physical, it's a conceptual space and what our future can hold on the land.
Because there's so much misconceptions about it
our entire
and reactionary nonsense to it, so
against our bodies and our minds and our hearts and our spirits. It's time and space to heal.
When it comes down to it, it's pretty simple. It is about the jurisdiction and authority and autonomy that we should have as Indigenous peoples over our own land and our own territory.
So to enact back to land or land back, I really do believe that it needs to be an awakening of a self to act, whether that's to step forward or step back as a leader. Everyone has a place in this life to stand up for what is right. Everyone has a role to play, and it's not going to look the same for every person. It's not going to look the same for all backgrounds of peoples and nations, but it's our responsibility to act.
I think it means thinking about reciprocity, about what has already been taken forcibly from Indigenous people and then what settler people can be offering in return. It's not enough to acknowledge the territory, but actually thinking about what are the protocols. Do they even know what they are? How to be in conversation about asking for consent to even be present on a territory. I think settler folks need to do a lot of reflecting around what it would actually mean to live in accordance with Indigenous law.
There's a lot of movements everywhere that you can financially contribute to because it does take resources to be out, like tiny house warriors, like Get 'em Den, like Porcupine Warriors in Toronto, Six Nations. People can make donations of food, time, even just saying kind things to land defenders, water protectors goes a long way as far as the morale goes.
Everything that anyone can do for land back, enacting land back and embodying land back philosophy is truly showing up to support front lines, truly putting resources and strength that you have out there. If you feel like you want land back but you don't enact anything, well, that's just a liberal fantasy. It's the belief that you can change the world by simply feeling a certain way. In order to actually progress the world, you have to put who you are out there and put your strength and know injustice and speak out about injustice. Because land back is a reflection of previous injustice. So in order to enact land back, one must be a part of Indigenous-led movements.
So I think that video pretty much like sums it up very nicely. However, we still have time. So I figure what I'll do, because I have the print version of the Red Deal right here, and they have a small section about land back, and it's not long. It's what, 1, 2, 3 pages, literally. That is how simple land. What? I'm not saying the process of land back is simple, because there's a lot of intricacies and a lot of intersectionality to it. But understanding it is that simple, that in the print edition, they only have 3 pages dedicated to it. And I mean, they have other chapters when they talk about, like, healing the planet and whatnot. But I figure I'll cover this. And this would be on page 27 of the print edition of the Red Deal. Because unfortunately, they don't have it in the online version, which I'll link in a little bit. So land back. The best forms of environmental policy come from the bottom up. And momentous change only happens with the might of a people's movement behind it. In North America, change begins with the land, one of the primary sources of both wealth and inequality. As Dina Gilio-Whitaker from the Colville Confederated Tribes argues in her book, as long as grass grows, settler state conservation policies stem from protecting slivers of nature by killing and removing indigenous peoples from the land to create nature reserves, national and state parks, and public lands. Under Trump's administration, millions of acres of this land were open to oil and gas extraction, threatening indigenous sacred sites and surrounding communities. But private land ownership has been equally devastating. The Homestead Act of 1862 carved up 270 million acres of indigenous territory for white settlers. The invaders pulverized buffalo skulls into fertilizer for their plots. The sacred animals slaughtered by the millions to near extinction to starve indigenous peoples off the land. Once cleared and settled, homesteading produced wealth for generations of white settlers, while black and native and non-white people were categorically excluded. Where there weren't crops, industrial feedlots, and grazing pastures for cattle replaced open-range buffalo herds. Today's large-scale industrial farming raises ethical questions, not about how these animals die, but about how they live. Today, white settlers own 96% of all agricultural lands and 98% of privately owned land in the United States. In 1970, Vine Deloria Jr. candidly spelled out the problem and even suggested a solution to North American settlers. It just seems to a lot of Indians that this continent was better off when we were running things. He wrote in the New York Times, "Perhaps liberal-minded readers of that era thought it was a clever wordplay. The posturing of a red power militant, attention-grabbing, sloganeering, but not a serious political demand. To the original people of this land, it was truth and prophecy. No society can ever have an ethical relationship to a place it stole. And today, Deloria's words sound more like rational environmental policy, than militant jargon when compared to what's been on offer. A drive it like he stole it mentality, or more accurately, a live on it like he stole it attitude. Under current U.S. law, indigenous sovereignty provides limited recourse. Tribes themselves represent a third sovereignty next to states and federal authorities. The imperialist foundation of federal Indian law, however, severely limits the exercise of tribal self-government. Racist and colonial legal doctrines that make up the foundation of federal Indian law, such as the doctrine of discovery, domestic dependent nation status, and plenary power, and oversight by the Bureau of Indian Affairs, reveal that indigenous U.S. relations are colonial to the core and remain centered on the acquisition of land. The successive stages of federal Indian law, allotment, citizenship, tribal enrollment, termination, and self-determination, our current era, have also in various ways presented colonial domination as a form of empowerment to enable indigenous consent for their own dispossession. In the 1970s, for example, the Nixon administration reversed the trend of terminating the federal status of tribes by introducing a new direction of Indian self-determination. Despite the name change, indigenous peoples and land today are no more self-determined than they were during prior eras, largely because the United States still holds imperial and colonial control over indigenous nations. American Indian nations are also the only human beings who are under the boot of the Department of Interior, the federal agency in charge of managing wildlife, parks, and Indians. Federal Indian law is due for a complete overhaul, if not total dismantlement, which would go a long way towards undoing the hegemony of colonial relations that keeps indigenous life and land under permanent siege. Indigenous laws and governance systems would reemerge in place of federal Indian laws. Treaties would be enforced not by U.S. government, but by indigenous nations. Land back would become mandatory, ushering in a different type of development and reconstruction of our fundamental relationship to the land, not promised on ownership but on collective well-being. Transforming our relationship with the land would create conditions for caretakers who aren't exclusively indigenous to inherit the earth, to work with, take care of, restore, and heal the land as diverse workers whose labor is bound, quite literally. With the land itself, we are citizens of a land that has yet to be brought into existence, but nonetheless exists in the recesses of our long historical memories and revolutionary imagination. The focus, however, is not just on land within what is the domestic territory of the United States. Demilitarization also means land back to the nations and territories occupied by more than 800 overseas U.S. military bases that violate sovereignty and deny self-determination to millions. Guantanamo Bay, Okinawa, Korea, Guam, Hawaii, the Philippines, Iraq, Egypt, Afghanistan, Puerto Rico, El Salvador, Honduras, Panama, and so many other places the U.S. occupies. Land back means the return of just relations between the human world and the other than human world. It means removing the overseas U.S. military threat that encircles and bullies other nations. Land back is about justice and about bringing in a new world based on peace and cooperation, not coercion or force. So that's pretty much how the Red Nation positions land back, which lines up with the video we watched. What do you think, Viv? I mean, you already know about this stuff, but...
Yeah, I mean, land back on both, local, national, and global scale, really.
Yeah, it's an international movement. It's not something...
Yeah, it is. It's
exclusive.
international,
Yeah,
it is.
because some people think it's only something here in North America. And...
No, indigenous peoples are oppressed all over.
Yeah.
And in a lot of places, they're not given autonomy over their land. They'll like over here, they're quote unquote wards of the state
Yeah.
when they should be independent nations. And not just wards of the state.
Or under the boot of the state. Things like that.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, I mean, I think that pretty much sums it up. So when we start this panel in about 10 minutes, hopefully.
So in less material terms, in terms of the physical land, another thing land back can also mean is reconnecting our people who a lot of us have been disconnected after, hundreds of years of colonization, etc., etc. So reconnection of our people to our culture, our cultures, our lands, our communities, and our languages. So it also means having our people learn our languages. So we can keep that culture alive, since those languages are tied to the land.
Absolutely. It's also key. I was gonna say the other thing is. Oh, hold on, I got a message. Okay, Andy said they're gonna be here. She'll be here in a few minutes. She's getting her kids settled. Alright.
Yeah.
I was going to say, it's
For
also...
example, being Cree Métis diaspora, there are some materials online for me to learn small parts of the dialect that my people are at.
Yeah.
Just because there are different types of Cree, just like, just different dialects.
Well,
Anyways, yeah, there's materials online so I can learn small pieces.
Yeah, but the major problem is that indigenous people have to, like... There's not much left of the culture. I mean, a lot of it's been passed down, but because of colonialism, it's sort of fractured, I think is the way to put it.
Yeah, I know so many indigenous people who have been disconnected from their own cultures, from being stolen from their families, their communities, adopted out to white parents who then never helped them connect to their cultures whatsoever. And on and on. That goes to ICWA.
Yeah, the whole ICWA thing. Let me pop out the... Am I able to pop this out? No. I was going to try to set this up to display who's talking and whatnot, but it's not cooperating.
It also means the restoration really of our legal systems as the law.
The treaties,
on
basically.
The land.
Yeah.
It's more than that, but like how matriarchies.
The hierarchy.
I mentioned that. The matriarchies because. Sorry, I'm a bit tired.
It's all right. Well, what I was gonna say was, with land back in general, so when it comes to, like, leftists and communism here in North America, it's something that has to happen along with decolonization before we can even talk about a revolution.
Oh yeah, now I remember.
Yep.
It also means to reclaim what it means to be indigenous, to once again have our culture passed on matrilineally. Because under the colonial culture, like here in Canada, I imagine works in the same way in the US, but it's passed along the father, which is the complete opposite of most of our cultures.
Yeah. It's excuse me.
And so that means, unfortunately, that often translates to culturally, if your mom's indigenous, you are indigenous, but legally, the government will not recognize that. So they'll be like, your father's not indigenous, but your mother is, so you're not indigenous.
Yeah, it's
That's just one of many complications.
why is this not popping up? I was gonna try to pull. Jeez, I don't know why this isn't coming up. I was gonna try to pull up the PDF version of the Red Deal and stick it in chat, but well, yeah, and that's because of the obstacles that settler powers put in, and we've had that discussion before. You know, like if you what was it? Like if you're indigenous but you marry someone white, then they strip you of your indigeneity or whatever, and that's pretty messed up in its own right.
So yeah, like it's like the ICWA thing. Except it shouldn't just be indigenous nations have jurisdiction over our children. We should have jurisdiction over all of our lands, over ourselves. We should be our own legally recognized entities that are independent.
Absolutely.
That's my thoughts on it.
Yeah. And then and then I remember in other discussions when you talk about like what this would, I guess, hypothetically look like. It'd be like all nations have a vote when it comes to policies and whatnot.
Yeah, I mean, a lot of yeah, essentially, yeah. With some of them, you'd just do with the treaties the way they originally were. Even though technically, they've all been violated. I live, however, I'm currently living on non-treaty land, as in, stolen.
Yeah.
No deal was made, no negotiation, it was just stolen. I'm over here in British Columbia for context. It's pretty much all stolen land here.
Well, it's the same thing with, me being in the northeast of the states here. It's same deal pretty much. Which isn't good. But, I guess the way I look at this stuff, when I yell at other white people about this, is we can change that, though. I think we can pull, there's the whole thing that happened, because, I think a lot of this panel is going to be discussing, like, maybe a bit of the culture stuff, but,
A little bit.
I remember we touched on, like, one thing Rabbit was enthusiastic about was, like, the past and present revolutionary movements, like AIM, more recent things like the Red Nation, and, God, I'm trying to find something to pull up here. Alright. Well, I just dropped some links in the chat for the Red Deal. I think that's important. That should be required reading for anyone who says they're a communist or a leftist. That should just be required reading. But like, there was the whole thing recently with like Leonard, with Leonard Peltier, right? And I've covered this on past streams. The march they did, which was organized by not only the American Indian movement, they were like the main organizers, but I'm trying to find more info because I want to throw it in chat for people. I kind of wish I had the stuff ahead of time. Let's see, March, Leonard. They did like God, what was it? Like 1,100 miles. 1,100 mile march for Leonard Peltier to demand justice. And I believe what I said last time on my stream when I was covering this was they are sort of like showing what the left should be doing, right? Because we have leftists who they don't even want to leave their house, or they call themselves leftists, but they don't leave the house. They don't do anything. They never tried anything. But here's like an example of a current revolutionary movement. Again, and I'll, you know, I might be wrong, but I'll always say that indigenous resistance is what the true vanguard is. You know, in regards to North America. And then the second closest vanguard we've had was the Black Panther Party. You know, and people don't like when I say that, but, you know, you gotta look at, well, who's been fighting this the longest? Who is on the front lines of this sort of struggle? And so it's always indigenous resistance, because you never see...
Never stopped.
Yeah, it never stops. It's been going since 1492. It's just continuous, right? Because that's sort of, and there's ups and downs to that, but that's sort of like when we look at like what Kwame Ture talks about when he differentiates organization and mobilization. Well, indigenous resistance at its core has always been organized. That's hence eternal. It's still happening. Whereas, you know, when it comes to like the white left, which, you know, I'm, you know, the quote-unquote white left. I use that in air quotes because it's a social construct. The problem being, they stop short. And when you get on the subject of decolonization or land back, or even indigenous resistance, they end up reacting with reactionary views. We've seen this in other, you know, I'm not going to get into too many details, but we've seen this in other leftist spaces.
Oh yeah, I mean,
unfortunately,
some of that goes down to the early foundations of our theories, and you know, stuff that was critiqued later on by various BIPOC folks about how deeply racist the original works were, and so on.
Yeah.
Like, I'm a Marxist, however, Engels and Marx, oh boy, it's extremely racist, based on complete nonsense about indigenous peoples, but however, that does not mean we should throw out the ideas. I personally like the methodology, however, I do see those types of issues, along with that historical progressivism around capitalism somehow being better than feudalism and so on and so on. Like, this weird European white supremacy sort of thing that we need to abandon as Marxists or communists or socialists.
Yeah, it's a matter of what was I gonna say? The words. I'm looking for the words. Like, there's no reason to, and even again, like I always bring up, and not to, you know, go off too much topic. Like, this is why I appreciate revolutionaries like Kwame Ture and whatnot, because he talks about this, and he mentions what you mentioned, the contradictions there. But
I could talk about this all day.
But despite those contradictions, there's something of value there, right? There's something that has helped other struggles around the world. You know, Vietnam, China, Korea, Cuba, so on and so forth. Like, there's a lot, and struggles that didn't work out so well. But the fact is, it's valuable. And when people criticize Marx and Engels on that front, you know, because of some of the colonialist,
well, that's exactly it. You need it to be a principled critique.
Yeah.
But like, if you have read Marx and you understand that the main essence is the methodology, and we throw out all of those reactionary beliefs that don't work, and that's the way it should be. Is if history does not agree with your analysis, then you need to change your analysis, because you believe fundamentally flawed things.
Yeah. And like I think the thing to drive home that's important is, you know, like myself or Viv, we're not sitting here saying don't read Marx, don't read Engels. Like, it's important to read them, but it's also important to have at the same time that understanding and analysis that, hey, Engels funded Marx because Engels, I believe they had a what was it? They owned some land here in the States that was pretty much extracting slave labor. And that's where his money came from to fund Marx. Which is another thing, you know, not to make this all about Marx, but is another thing that's sort of people overlook, forget, don't want to talk about, or when you do talk about it, then there's this whole, you get this infighting nonsense. Because you're going.
You can keep going.
Oh, okay. Well, I was gonna say, you get this infighting nonsense that happens because then, you know, and I mean, Fanon talks about this. It's the whole thing with, like, the settler, quote unquote, doesn't want to look in the mirror and accept responsibility for what's happened. And it doesn't mean that, you know, people today, or just because you're born white, quote unquote, it doesn't mean that you yourself did that stuff, but what it means is you're in a system that you benefit from greatly at the expense of others, and the only just thing to do is that you need to look at that, reject it, and then fight against it.
Yeah,
And
it was one thing I want to talk about at some point on it is Indigenous and BIPOC alienation from the left. Just, you know, because it's a mix of a lot of things. The framing, the words themselves, as well as various foundations that various people have not done self-criticism about.
the chauvinism, that sort of stuff.
Yep. Oh yeah,
Yeah,
no,
we could probably
the
touch on
left
that
is
too.
extremely alienating to indigenous peoples. Like I could never really fit into the left, so I was like, this isn't my culture. This isn't my culture.
Well, yeah, I remember.
This isn't how we do things. And so I quite like dialectical methodology. However, we do not need Marx's ideas of communism or socialism in order to have land back. We have our own political systems and ideas.
Yeah.
We've had societies for friggin' forever, and they were intentional, and you know, methodical. We knew what we were doing. Living in harmony with the land, like, and not in like not like in a fantastical way, but just in the sense that we contributed to the land as much as it contributed to us. And restoring those types of kinship systems is going to be massive for land back.
Yeah, it's what was I gonna say?
Like
You don't need
you
don't need the validation of Marx to carry out what you're gonna carry out. You know, like as in struggle.
Exactly.
Like you don't need the blessing of Marx or the blessing of Engels. Is basically what you're getting at, which is valid.
Yes,
like you
and
know.
so while I use the methodology in various analysis, I when I look for things, when I look for answers, when I look for the future, I don't look to Marx and Engels. I don't look to them. I look to my people and the way we did things and the way we're doing things.
Yeah, definitely. Trying to pull up Discord here. It's not cooperating.
That's my own personal feelings on that matter, though. I've talked to quite a few Indigenous comrades, and I can't speak for them, but it's a pretty common view.
Trying to. Oh my god, this is.
Pretty
I
common view
apologize.
that while we can borrow insights from various leftist ideologies, they are not our guides.
No, because you already have your guides. You have your culture and your teachings, and that's a problem with the left. Because I mean, we've encountered these sorts of spaces, where, God forbid, you criticize the Marx boy. God, that does
Well,
not look good.
if I have a question about culture, you know what? I go ask an elder.
Yeah, I mean,
Somebody knows more than me.
yeah, definitely. I am trying to. Hey, Chimera, what's up? How are things going tonight? Things are going well. I am struggling with a bit of technical problems. Trying to get this ready for this panel. We have one comrade right now. Busy taking care of their child, so they're not here yet, which is fine. Yeah, we didn't even start yet. We're just waiting on Andy and Rabbit. So Viv and I were just kind of going on about some of the contradictions with. Oh, hello.
This is Andy. I'm here.
Oh, welcome.
Hey,
Hey.
how's everyone? Can you hear me all right?
Yeah. The stream.
Okay, cool.
Yeah, I'm sure everyone hears it.
Okay.
I think we're just waiting on Rabbit.
Okay. I'm going to keep myself on mute though while I'm not talking, so that way you won't have to hear like any background noise from my heater or from my kid, just in case they come in.
Oh, that's completely fine.
Okay.
Let me shoot a message over to Rabbit and see. He's not online, so I hope we didn't forget. Let's see.
Well, we could still.
Oh yeah, we could still
They
talk.
can't,
Like
they
he might
can't
be
make it. We
running
could
late.
still talk about this stuff.
Yeah,
So.
he might be running late, and that's oh jeez. Wait, there we go. Okay.
I would like to get the
Yeah.
professional knowledge, that academic knowledge, though.
Yeah. I mean, and there's nothing wrong with having that knowledge either.
Oh,
I
no,
mean,
it's fantastic. It's fantastic.
and you know,
You have some of the,
well,
can actually cite specific histories.
yeah, well, I mean, and I'll have have Andy and you and Rabbit do introductions. I'll give Rabbit a little bit of time here.
My thing is more critique and promoting just promoting people to actually support land back, stuff like that.
Yeah.
So
I just yell at other white people
yeah,
because I myself am white, and I'm like, you need to do better. So I yell at people.
yeah. I feel like the only thing I end up really doing is dunking on settlers and settlerism.
Yeah, but that has to happen. That needs to be a main driving point. I'll say Chimera in chat says the dismissive attitude some leftists have towards indigenous people needs to be destroyed. Absolutely.
I would describe myself as militantly patient with settlers.
Well, to an extent. I mean, there's been cases I know you would come to me and say, "Oh, so and so, this nonsense," and you just like you throw your arms
Yeah,
up.
but
Like,
that
fuck
was
'em.
but orgs are different. Orgs
Yeah.
are different. I will critique them to the ends of the earth.
Yeah. I guess in your case, you're talking more on a one-on-one thing. You're a little more.
Oh yeah, 101. 101, like I said, militant patience.
Yeah. Yeah, Rabbit may be running late, so we might get started in a few minutes. I think the way I'm trying to look up how I set up the. What did I propose? Already showed the video, read that.
Yeah, I'm gonna have to see if, for future stuff, if any of the people I know might wanna hop on at some point.
Oh yeah, like if we do more stuff like this down the road.
Yes, I'm going on another date with a lady next week. I'm
Ooh.
Polly, for context.
Yeah.
Vena's one of my partners. So yeah.
Yes. Yeah.
Anyways, yeah, I'm going on the date, and I don't think they'd be particularly interested in this topic. However, I have another friend who might be interested in Duncan, and just given perspective.
Yeah, definitely.
Yeah.
That's
More indigenous peoples given perspectives. It's good
well,
stuff.
and that's sort of why I'm doing this panel tonight, because I don't see enough people. I mean, don't get me wrong. Like I see indigenous people themselves, like like Silver Spook, which I meant to reach out to, and I just never did. So it's kind of my bad.
Yeah,
because I wanted
I've
to get
been
him
talking
on.
about this
Yeah.
ever since I started, physically organizing in the community. I've been like at every turn, I've been like, what the hell is the left doing?
Yeah, I like I don't know, like if we do a panel like this down the road, I'm probably gonna try to reach out to a lot more people. But like, Gots came to me and was like, "Hey, this is a good idea," and I said, "Okay," and then he said Andy has the studying she's doing and all that stuff. I was like, "Well, that sounds great," and then I told you, and you were on board, and told Rabbit. Well, I think next time around we'll try to get more people. Oh, excuse me.
I'm always on board to
Oh, definitely. I think we'll still have a lot to discuss. But I think about
talk
6.
about being a one of those gay two-spirit pre-Métis people.
Yeah. Well, I think I'll give it a few more minutes. Like at 6:20, I think we'll start. Um, I'm unsure how long everyone wants to go. I'm hoping Rabbit will just like pop in.
Big
That'd be
shout
nice.
out to my two-spirit diaspora fam.
Yeah. The trans community has a lot to learn from that too. Not that people dismiss it, but there's a lot of people who just aren't aware of any of that.
Yeah.
Yeah. What I mean by that is it's something that's been around forever, and a lot of eggs that hatch, I would say. The term.
This one's more modernized, generalized.
Oh yeah.
Our specific nations have specific terminologies for specific roles, whatnot, relations.
Yeah. Well, I just think there's a history there everyone should try to learn about.
Yeah.
Again, Rabbit made a great video on that. He was talking about Thanksgiving, but also kind of dived into the queer history and whatnot, which was an amazing video. Maybe we'll watch that a little bit later, but I think about 2 more minutes, then we'll get started. I guess the way we'll do it is introductions, pronouns, all that stuff, and then get going. Just like dive into the topics, and I don't really have like a rigid format or anything. Like I'm not saying we gotta do things in a specific order. I kind of want the discussion to, like, I'm here to facilitate it, but like whatever you want to talk about or don't want to talk about, that's sort of, I'm open for like whatever. I think touching on the revolutionary stuff we discussed earlier would be important. ICWA, I think, is another one we should also touch on, because again, not a lot of people are. Sadly, I don't see a whole lot of people shining a light on that. There is a few streamers I could think of, like Comrade Clevername, Famous Horse. I think Rob Rousseau might have touched on it. But like at least the people I follow, I haven't seen a whole lot of mentions of it. I think Barrick, Comrade Barrick, was another streamer who's touched on it a little bit, at least in conversation, because he does more like strict gameplay stuff. But I think that'll be important because that's something I have resources for that. So when we do get on that subject, I could throw them in the chat, and then whoever is hanging out here, I would urge them to like spread those resources and bring more awareness to it, because that's fairly important to do. So with it being 6:20, do we want to get started and do introductions? And hopefully Rabbit will just join us in a bit. I don't know. Are you there, Andy?
I personally think 20
Yeah, I'm
minutes
here.
is
Oh, okay.
plenty of time.
Um,
I'm here.
do you want to introduce yourself, pronouns, like, you know, your background a bit, and then I'll pass it on
Yeah.
to Viv. Okay.
My name is Andrea Perkins, but everyone calls me Andy. I am a PhD candidate at the University of Oregon. I'm currently working on my second master's degree on archaeology. I have a master's degree in cultural anthropology. And I also have a background in Indigenous storytelling. I had my apprenticeship in Indigenous storytelling. My research is around Indigenous plant knowledge and storytelling. My tribes are, I'm an enrolled member of the Chinook Nation and the Chinook tribe of the Lower Chinook. And then I'm also a registered enrolled member of the Haida Nation.
It's quite a list of knowledge there, going to a university and whatnot.
Yeah, and then my pronouns are she, they, them.
Okay. Viv, do you want to go?
Yeah. Okay, Vivian. I am a recent university dropout who realized that my passion was, and like my heart was, in organizing a community and being militant to promoting and supporting, just the indigenous peoples whose lands were on, and so on.
And,
So I find that to be more motivating these days. And now I'm a Twitch streamer for some reason. I play video games, make weird noises, and then I'm militant on other people's streams.
yeah, like you have such wholesome streams, and then you come on my stream and we're like dunking on cottagecore and stuff.
Well, I would argue it's wholesome. Cottagecore is trash.
Yeah. My name's Valkyrie. I'm just like a white communist streamer who yells at other white people to listen to indigenous people and to, like, I don't know, do better. Like, read indigenous literature. Don't get caught up on trying to just focus on like Marx and Lenin. Try to like follow stuff like the American Indian Movement, Red Nation. Read the books they put out. Buy the books. Support these types of orgs, because when you buy their books, you're supporting the work they do, and they feed a lot of people in need. They help people. They clothe people, and you know they're sort of like the tip of the spear when we talk about like revolutionary struggle, and you know, and that's, you know, and I'm a member of CPUSA, so, and I figured thanks to Comrade Gottsdam, because I won't use his actual name, but he came to me, you know, the reason why we're doing this panel. He said, hey, Valkyrie, why don't you you know, it's Thanksgiving month, quote unquote, why don't you host a panel? I have this friend of mine who's studying indigenous cultures and going to university, and I was like, hey, that sounds like a good idea. So here we are, right? And I figure we'll cover tip of the spear forced into that position. Yes, and that's kind of why people need to support them. Exactly, we must back them up. And that's what I do. I yell at other people to do that and do better. Because the amount of chauvinism and dismissive attitudes amongst the Western left is disgusting. And we're seeing that on a larger scale now. Which is awful. So that's why we're here tonight. And I figure the topics, we'll focus on is like, again, I want it to be sort of free-flowing. But I figure, we could touch on some of the cultural stuff. If Andrea wants to get into that, we could also touch on some of the past and current revolutionary movements, because that's important. There's a lot happening. Given earlier I was talking about the March for Justice for Leonard Peltier. There's been some like great books I've read. One I'm still going through, but stuff like The Red Deal. There's Red Nation Rising. That sort of touches on all the Bordertown violence stuff. I'm not saying we got to get into the details of that because that's really dark, but like, there's been a lot of. It seems like from someone like myself who's has spent the last few years trying to learn about this stuff, learn about the movement, learn about the resistances of the past and present. It seems like there's an upsurge in indigenous literature. So if we want to talk about that. And then ICWA, I think, is important. We should probably maybe try to close out the panel touching on ICWA, because again, like I said, not a lot of people are talking about it. And I have like a link for some really good resources on that I would like to see everyone in chat spread around and retweet, and just, even though Twitter's burning down, at least try to get the information out there. So, where would the two of you want to start? Like, where do you want to start with this discussion?
I don't know. It just depends. Like, since my scope is so broad, I can talk about. I was raised. My mother is an activist. Was an activist. I was raised in a Marxist household with an indigenous mom who raised me to be an activist. So, as far as movements go, I can talk a lot about different indigenous movements because a lot of my family is still involved with a lot of indigenous groundwork. Or we could talk about cultural questions that you might have, or historical questions, or it really just depends. Like, we can get started here.
Yeah. So, I would say okay. Well. Oh, what, Viv?
One last thing before I start. I forgot to say my pronouns. Yeah, I'm one of those. I'm Two-Spirit. I'm Cree Métis diaspora, and I use she/her pronouns. I'm one of those gay weirdos. So there you go.
That's a colorful way to introduce yourself in a positive way. I think it's cute. I would say maybe we'll start with because again I'm not gonna try to sit here and act like I'm an expert on anything. I wouldn't dare do that. But like I guess for people in chat, like when it comes to some of the revolutionary stuff of the past, what were some of the prominent like focal points that sort of like carried over into movements of today? Like specifically, like what figures really are sort of like what revolutionary figures of indigenous resistance in the past is something that so many current activists look at today?
Like for like I think for a lot of indigenous people, like we look to our own tribes and our own like communities for like a lot of leaders. Like for my people, it's Billy Frank Jr. Really push for land and water rights, especially involving the salmon and how we approach the federal government in our water rights back home in Oregon and Washington and Alaska. When it comes to like the Lakota, it's like you said, like Russell Means and Trudeau and Leonard and the AIM movement. You have like more historical figures such as Tecumseh in the Midwest and Chief Joseph or Chief Pontiac in Michigan. You have so many Native elders that we look to from the past to gain like our strategies and stuff. So like I said, I'm going to talk about Billy Frank and people from my own nation because it's who I know the most, right?
Yeah.
So with Billy's work, that his work was a stepping stone for my own mother's work when it came to fighting in the fish wars in the 1980s and us trying to fight against Gordon's Fish Company. I don't know if anybody knows who Gordon's Fish Company is. They make the fish sticks.
Yeah, I'm familiar.
Okay, so a lot of that groundwork with the fishing wars of the 1980s really laid down the precedent model for how we do a lot of our environmental activism that we do today when it comes to the barricades and more direct actions. Really helped lay that framework, and so did Wounded Knee. Like Wounded Knee also showed us like how to make those barricades, how to create like a supply chain for mutual aid, which also then carried over to Alcatraz. So like all these movements, like I said, the fishing wars in the 1980s, and you have Alcatraz and Wounded Knee, all these events culminated and created like these baselines for how we run movements like the camps at Unistoten in BC and or Line 3 here in the States in the Midwest, or Standing Rock with No Dapple. Like all those movements their foundations are in those previous barricades, those previous occupations, where we had more direct action and more like we're going to confront the enemy instead of just trying to do legislation. So like a lot of natives, there was this time period where we stopped fighting directly, and then we tried to like go through legal means. You know what I mean? Like we tried to go through the federal government. We tried to help write laws or petition the government, like with Elizabeth. She tried to go and make direct law changes in the state of Alaska.
Trying to like do reforms and whatnot.
Yeah, like more of that method, as where Billy's method or Russell's method or other Indigenous activists were like, no, we need to step in directly in between the companies that want to hurt our resources, like hurt our land and hurt our water. And these movements are not just rooted in like the need to protect the land and water and the resources that are in the land and water, but it's also connected to how we live as Indigenous people. Because since we are so connected to the land and the water, we are literally fighting for our very existence within these fights. Like our literal existence is tied to the existence of that salmon. So if the salmon disappears, what does that mean for my people who are dependent on the salmon? It means that my people are in jeopardy of becoming extinct as well, because we're so dependent on salmon. We are the salmon people. So without salmon, there is no Chinook people. There's no Haida people, because we are intertwined. We have a symbiotic relationship. There can't be one without the other. We have to exist together. So these fights, like I said, these fights for the land and water, our ancestors have taught us like it's not just about the land. It's not just about the water. It's so much broader. It encompasses every single aspect of indigeneity. We're not just fighting to protect the land. We're fighting to protect everything. People don't seem to understand that. Like, oh, they're just fighting over water. It's not just about the water. It's not just about overfishing. It's not just about SeaWorld coming in and stealing our orcas. It's about all the all-encompassing fact that we as Indigenous people, the fight for the land is the same as the fight against missing and murdered Indigenous women. It's the same fight. They're not disconnected fights. Like everyone thinks like those are two disconnected topics. But the fight against DAPL is also the fight against missing and murdered Indigenous women and Two-Spirits. Like it's a complete. It's not like one or the other. It's both at the same time.
Yeah, everything's intersectional, and that ties into like border town violence and like when you talk about it's about everything. It really is a fight for the planet as a whole. that's why earlier I was mentioning it's like an international movement. And this is why, like, I yell at other communists within my circles, at least the ones who, most of them are pretty disciplined and understand this stuff, but there are some you encounter and it's like, wait, you're not like pushing for this stuff, because, like, you know, as much as people want to talk about like revolution or building a better world, the only way we're going to do that is by supporting these resistances, not by like lip service, but actually supporting them in any way that we can, whether that's materially supporting them by trying to stand with them, provide labor for them, or if you're someone who has money, perhaps donate money to one of these organizations. If there's a mutual aid effort for like water protectors or land defenders, doing that. Because, if people want to sit down and get into the nitty gritty and actually talk about like revolution, the first and foremost within my opinion is we need to fight for these things that so many indigenous revolutionaries are fighting for, and activists. I get a lot of, like, myself, I get a lot of pushback from some people over that, unfortunately. They don't like hearing that, because then it means...
No, they don't.
Because then it means, oh, wait a minute. Because they'll sit there and they'll be like, oh, America bad, America this, America... But the minute you talk about that, hey, you're on stolen land, and you need to, like, look... This is why I look at indigenous resistance as like a vanguard. It's like, you need to look at them to learn from, right? You need to listen to them. Otherwise, any sort, like, in my opinion, and I'm sure, this is like I'm being pushback here, but in my opinion, any sort of ideas of revolutionary struggle, outside of that being the spear, so to speak, is you're just asking for a socialist system on stolen land, and that's it's not very good.
Yeah,
Yeah,
and that's why a
we
lot of
don't
indigenous. Go ahead. You can go.
we don't exactly want another settler revolution. No, just no. What, like, one settler system's enough. Let's get rid of this one, and let's not do another.
Yeah. So I guess besides some of the points I put, do you have any Andrea, do you have like any links that you would like me to try to drop in the chat right now regarding this stuff? Like something that maybe
I can round up. I have several link files.
Okay.
For different presentations that I've done over the years that I can is the chat that I chatted on earlier, like the one to send the links to, because I can just drop, like, after this I can drop so many links.
Okay, yeah, you could just drop
all
them in
kinds of
this.
links for not just like movements, but for everything we could be discussing. Like I have so much stuff.
Yeah, you could just drop it in the group chat, and then I'll throw it in my Twitch chat.
Yeah, because I have so much.
Yeah. Well, that's great, because I want people, and people, because we have a few people hanging out, and Gots just popped in the chat and said, listening while I drive home, so he's probably just getting out of work. But I genuinely want people who are listening to this, or even if they end up looking at the VOD of the stream, I want them to be like, oh, there's resources here. And I want people to, again, this is another problem you run into, people don't want to read, unfortunately, but I want people to, like, spread these links, read about it, and, like, have conversations with, have these conversations. Now, granted, if you're not indigenous, don't speak for indigenous people, obviously. But yeah,
reading links, but I can also drop different, like, there's different TikTokers I can drop that are, or different like podcasts. Like I have an indigenous friend who's an activist, and she has a podcast on social justice.
Yeah, all of it, like
prison reform and stuff like that. Like I can drop her stuff. Like I have, like I said, like not just like reading materials or but like how to like give to camps and how
Exactly.
to contribute to barricades and like I said, and even like I said, other native um, activists who have more of a like have a platform where they discuss these things like on a regular basis on their social medias and
Yeah,
stuff. I can
absolutely.
drop all that information.
Yeah, and we'll get that into the chat. What I was gonna say, like, I remember, now that we're on this like subject of the resistance stuff, like I remember when the Wet'suwet'en stuff was happening a few years ago, or when it was like at its peak. Like what I did myself was, obviously I don't live in Canada, so there's no way for me to, try to show up and support them. But I remember what I did was like give a little bit of money, at least what I could afford, because being on disability sucks. So it's like you don't have much. But then taking the resources, like the information to like their, I think they had a GoFundMe page up, and spreading that to other people, and then actually getting some comrades to like throw $5 here, $10 there, which might not sound like a lot as something to donate, but that adds up if people are spreading those links around to different circles and trying to help out in some way. I think like even people doing that is a great thing, because that the more people, even if it's only like $5 from a person for some mutual aid stuff or whatever, that goes a long way if multiple people look at it and contribute to that.
For sure, it does. Like $5 is keeping the generator on for a couple more hours, or making sure that if a tool breaks, they can get another one. Like that's huge. Like I always say that no amount is like that's no such thing as like a small amount. Like any amount helps.
Yeah.
Any amount, any time, any sharing, any like just bringing up in conversation, like talking about like contaminated water or contaminated soil, or how the fact like certain nations don't have running water, or talking about like birth defects, reserves, or just like even like talking about like, oh, did you know that there's an epidemic of missing and murdered Indigenous people here in Canada and the United States? Like just thinking about these things, because most people, like when I talk about Indigenous, number one thing I hear about when I talk about Indigenous issues is like, whoa, one, Native Americans are still around and we exist, yes, and two is that we didn't know, like we don't know about these things. Like people honestly do have no idea what's happening in Indigenous communities. Like one, they don't know that we exist half the time, and two, they don't even know. Like they have no clue. So just bringing it up, like in conversations about the environment, or about violence against women, or non-men, you know what I mean? Like anybody who doesn't fit like the settler patriarchal Western society's views of what's considered human, like we have to tell our stories over and over. And so even just talking about Indigenous issues is a huge goal. I'm not saying like talk for us, but like bring it up in conversation.
Oh yeah.
Have you heard? Yeah, you know what I mean? Like have you heard about, and then going, here are some Indigenous people who are speaking about this issue. You really should take a listen to them, or read what they're saying.
Yeah.
That, like I said, that really.
Oh, absolutely. I mean, I try, like, obviously, like, I don't speak for anybody, but, like, I've learned a lot from my partner, and reading literature, and, like, watching, like, I've been following the Red Nation for, like, a number of years now, so, like, when I do, because sometimes, a lot of my streams, it's just me, like, playing a game or something, but when I do cover political stuff, I try to highlight what videos they have on what things they're talking about, whether that's the recent stuff with Leonard Peltier and the march, which I'm surprised not a lot of people knew about. It's kind of infuriating because I see so many people who say they're communists, and you mention Leonard Peltier and they're like, oh yeah, that one guy, but they don't know about the continued fight that's been going on and on and on for decades now. And then like a while back, I remember pulling up some of the videos where they were covering what's happening in Hawaii with the U.S. Navy poisoning the waters.
Oh yeah, that's a big one too.
Yeah, that's another.
That's why people like don't go visit Hawaii right now. I'm just like, why? I'm like, because we don't have water.
It's
that's why.
Yeah, it is.
The entitlement.
Yeah, and what's sad about that only came to light because some of the military families were starting to be affected. So then it actually became a thing that's like, oh, then, you know, the media as a whole started putting a magnifying glass on it. But prior to that, though, you had all these activists and indigenous groups raising awareness about it, of like, you know, the poisoning of their families and children and relatives and stuff. But what's sad about it is it took non-indigenous people to be affected by it for then there to be any sort of discussion. Meanwhile, there should have been discussion prior.
Absolutely, but it never happens that way. It's always when either like something horrific happened, like horrific to the point where the media can't ignore it, or it's to the point where, like you said, a non-indigenous person was affected. So now they have to be involved.
Yeah, that's a frustrating part for me. Like, another content creator I follow is this guy. Well, actually, no, I should say they, because I believe they're non-binary. Silver Spook, and he's from Hawaii. They are from Hawaii and constantly covering this stuff, like constantly. I'm gonna just quickly drop their channel in chat, because they're always, like, when it comes to Hawaii, that's all they cover for the most part. I mean, they cover other stuff, but like, if people ever want like a wealth of information regarding like indigenous struggles in Hawaii, that's a content creator I would highly recommend. But do you have anything to add, Viv, on this particular subject of like raising awareness and
Yeah.
Okay.
As militant as I am, I don't talk about some of this, especially in public, because of how deeply personal a lot of this is. And so when we're talking about, you know, things like missing and murdered, or, you know, Indigenous One, Two-Spirit, etc., or boarding schools, you know, 60 Scoop, all that stuff. It's like, these are people we know. These are our families. These are our people in our communities. These aren't complete strangers that are going missing. And so when we're talking about these, when we do talk about these, when a community is saying something, settler reporters should be listening at all times, really, because we know what's going on far before it reaches the news.
Yeah, it's an epidemic. I was gonna say, in the book I'm reading, Red Nation Rising, there is quite a bit of talk of that. But I think the way that book was written, because I don't want to get into the details of that stuff, because it's really dark, but the way that book is written was pretty much like written for settlers to read. I'm going to drop that in chat as well. Let me see if I can find the proper link instead of linking to Amazon.
Yeah, on my end, I prefer talking about these, try and distance myself, just because, like I said, a lot of this is really personal. So,
oh no, I'm not sitting here saying,
no,
let's get into it.
So I prefer to talk about it from a historical perspective.
Oh yeah.
For that reason.
Yeah, it's like, this is a book I wouldn't even read on. Well, I thought about reading on stream, but it's really dark. It deals with, I mean, it doesn't hold back. It dives into all the nitty gritty stuff, and I think it's something that should, again, another thing that should be required reading, because it's something I don't see a lot of leftists talking about. Sure, those within my circles talk about it, but then outside of that, when you end up entering other leftist spaces, there's just like silence. they're too concerned about other things that aren't as important. Or not necessarily that, it's there's the disconnect, right? They're not connecting everything together, they're separating things. So, they'll talk about like trans people, getting killed or whatever, but they never make the connection to murdered, missing, and indigenous two-spirit. It's that, I think what it is at its core is a lack of political education and a lack of awareness. That's usually what I find within those circles. Or like Andrea mentioned earlier, there's a lot of just sometimes ignorance. People aren't aware, but in at least in my experience, I've run into cases where sometimes people don't even want to talk about that stuff.
One thing I will mention is that our various nations, we generally have groups that are doing this work, that are trying to solve these issues, that are investigating missing and murdered people, etc. We have all this stuff. Like, we're not just twiddling our thumbs hoping it magically gets fixed. So if there was anything in your community like that, maybe reach out, ask them what you can do to support, whether it's money or time or whatever.
Yeah, I was gonna say the
They
red.
do have, like,
Oh, go on.
in Canada, they do have, and also in Alaska, they just started this, but they do have groups of aunties that go out and actually do searches, because we know that the police aren't going to fucking search, right? So, we do have groups of aunties and uncles that go out and look for missing people. Sometimes they get the help of the community, but like I said, there's all those groups. There's not so many of them here in the States yet. There is a group in Seattle that was doing some work. But they're very small. But like, that's another thing that's happening like a lot. Like, there's just like little pockets of like search teams that are out there. Like I said, they're mostly aunties, uncles, cousins, stuff like that.
Absolutely. I won't say who because that gives away my location, but I've done a couple years of this work myself. And so I know how hard it is to get people to really help with this sort of thing.
It is.
I think that's something else that needs excuse me. I think that's something else that needs more awareness as well. Because I imagine something like that takes immense resources to carry out. Because these are people. So, like, in a situation like that, I'd imagine some sort of like, I would hope they have like donations set up, and then some sort of resources so if people want to volunteer with them, they could do so. And that's like another way to support this sort of stuff as well.
I can't have a little bit more. They have a better, like some nations in like the Saskatoon region, and also in Ontario, other parts of Canada, they have like a better network. It's just here in the States, it hasn't gotten that big. I know that there's people that do want to do this work, and I know that it's like in the baby stages of organizing here in the States. But like I said, they have a really good network in Canada where people can donate and can volunteer their time, or like even their vehicles. Like, I know like in Saskatoon they were asking for anybody who had like 4-wheelers or things like boats, so they can go on rivers and lakes, and or people who have scuba experience is a big one that they're always asking for. In BC, back home, they were asking for people with water experience, like either boat or scuba experience. So just things like that. Like, you can always use your talents for the revolution. That's what my mom always said. Always use your talents. So whatever you're talented at, like, contribute that to, like, funnel that into whatever movement within your area for that.
Yeah, absolutely.
For my
I
family.
I was gonna say I just dropped a podcast in the Twitch chat here, for it's a discussion by the Red Nation, and they cover the murdered missing Indigenous women in Two-Spirit. It's like an hour long, so I would encourage people, like, if you're looking into a little more background for that stuff, to listen to that podcast. It's on SoundCloud, and I think they might mention resources in there as well. I'm not quite sure. But that is something to check out and listen to. Even, it's from like 2 years back, but it's still relevant, obviously. And I was gonna drop this other link regarding queer Indigenous feminism, again from the Red Nation. They just seem to have like the most resources all in one place. But definitely, I think that's a good point you bring up with people using their skills, because everyone has different skills, different skill sets, talents, and the important thing is people shouldn't feel like, oh, well, because of XYZ, I can't do something for this. Where it's like, well, let's say you're not able to physically go and help out with these efforts, but perhaps you're a graphic designer. Well, then the proper thing, like if you're good at graphic design, for example, perhaps reach out to groups like this and offer your services to try to make some sort of like some sort of poster or some sort of thing to be used like on the ground and online to raise more awareness.
Absolutely, even just posters to help find missing people. That helps a lot, and a few people I know have actually been found that way. So it does help.
Absolutely. What was I gonna say? I'll say like another one or another resource I know of. Well, I mean, they don't focus on this stuff entirely, but there's another podcast called Someplace Underneath, and they had a few episodes they dedicated to this subject, with the murder, missing, and Indigenous Two-Spirit. I can't find that link at the moment. Yeah, I mean, I think that's, kind of repeating myself, but I think the important thing is bringing more awareness to these sorts of things. Is there any particular direction you want to shift the conversation to? I know earlier in the group chat, like a few days back, Viv mentioning like media representation. Or do we want to like continue on this sort of subject?
Well, I have two real things to hit on. One is, please read Indigenous theory. Please. Straight up, read Indigenous theory.
I'll drop a link in chat for that.
We don't need your prescriptivist idea of, whatever state or non-state or whatever. We don't need that. We have our cultures. But we do need, if you want to help, then you can help, Just don't expect to bring those into our spaces.
I think that's fair. I dropped a
Here
link.
to help us.
Yeah. I dropped a link that, again, Red Nation has like, they have a whole thing on Indigenous socialism and recommended reads.
I personally advocate for an Indigenous revolutionary socialism, but that's me personally.
I would say, what was I gonna say? But I bring up the, well, how long does everyone have tonight? I just want to get an idea of, like, how long we could go with this.
Can be on for a little bit longer. Like, it just depends, like, on what we're talking about and if, like, the conversation.
Okay.
You know what I mean? Like,
Yeah.
but I do have some, you know, I have a kid.
Oh, yeah. Well, I don't want to keep you too long.
Yeah.
But I'll let you two decide. Like, where do you want to, like, cover next? Like, do you want to get to the ICWA stuff? Do you want to cover, like, representation of media? Or is there
Media,
maybe
just talk
something
about
else?
something lighter.
What?
Talk about something a little bit lighter.
Okay.
A little bit more,
Yeah, that'd be good.
less.
So, representation of media? Maybe?
I think so. I actually teach our class. I actually did an experimental class on Indigenous representation in media, and we talked about like everything from movies to music to television, comic books, cartoons, and how like in the last couple of years it's actually gotten better, but it's still not where it needs to be. Like,
Excuse me.
like especially when it comes to like Indigenous people and sci-fi or fantasy, where it's still kind of romanticizing this noble Indian, or I mean, it's not just like an everyday person who's indigenous. Being indigenous is a part of their identity, but it's not like this over romanticized version of indigenous. In certain genres of media, I think recently, like the best representation of Indigenous people in media is Reservation Dogs. If you haven't watched Reservation Dogs, I highly recommend it.
I've watched
Nicola
it.
Petey and his team do an amazing job.
I've only seen the first season, but that's kind of why I brought this. What?
The second season is even better. Like, there are really powerful moments this season that really resonated with me, like as an Indigenous person, and seeing certain things like brought up in our community, like aunties going to conference, or even how we conduct funerals and do death, or honor our dead. Those things that make up our Indigenous communities, like that window into Indigenous communities, like how we operate, like our sense of humor too. Like, we are really funny people. And I think we're really funny people because we've been through so much shit. So like our kind of humor too kind of comes off as like mean and kind of dark sometimes. But that's just like
Yeah,
that's
absolutely.
that's just our humor. But
Oh
I like
yeah,
the show because
absolutely.
it shows our humor, you know, how dark it is. We're like, oh my god, why are Indians like, why are natives so dark? This is who we are, sweetie. Like, I don't know how to explain you, but yeah, I love Reservation because of that.
Well, the reason why I mentioned the represent, I kind of wanted to just talk about Reservation Dogs. Because I like the show. And I remember I first heard about it from my partner, and at the time, she hasn't seen it yet, and we didn't we watch like 2 episodes together, Viv? Like 2 or 3?
Yeah.
Like, we haven't
Yeah.
finished, so I won't get into spoilers.
I was extremely excited, especially since I was so disappointed with the cancellation of Trickster.
Yeah,
So
I'm surprised with that one.
Yeah, I just want to, because I watched.
Really disappointed.
So obviously, I'm not going to spoil the show, because like I would tell people watching right now, go watch Reservation Dogs. Like, when the stream's over, go watch it. Like, it's great. But like watching that show, just as like sort of an outsider looking in, it came across much more positive, and it also avoided the usual tropes. You know, again, stuff we don't have to get into, but the usual tropes that media likes to do with minority groups. Excuse me.
Yeah, I actually that's why I love it, because when I watched it, I was like, this is so relatable. Like, this is stuff that happens, or jokes we tell, or whatever. It's just so relatable.
I also just found the show funny overall. It's
That too.
It's well written, and like I think with us talking about like representation of media, that's probably like the best example to use, because I would like oh, excuse me, I apologize. I would like to see well, just with everything, I would like to see better representation going forward with everything, because it's sort of a glimpse into like what good representation and storytelling could look like, right? Like this little, it's sort of like a window into that, and unfortunately, like as a whole, we don't quite have that yet.
I would argue that this is, goes back to earlier, this is heavily tied to land back, and indigenous nations should have the resources to be able to make these projects themselves. We shouldn't have to rely on Hollywood to, give us $1 million just so we can make our peoples laugh. We should be able to do this ourselves.
I would agree 100%. And I mean, I think some of the other positive media, well, I mean, it was more of a horror movie, but I remember, like, when Viv and I watched Blood Quantum, it was, like, an example of, like, what horror could be like if it's completely, indigenous written and directed and everything else. And I kind of like how they took, that movie, they took the idea of, like, a zombie, and while it wasn't completely new, they did some interesting things with it, especially with the social commentary of how, well, would this be spoil? If I say how the zombies are a thing, would that be spoilers, Viv, you think? Or should I just tell people to go watch Blood Quantum?
I don't know. Just watch Blood Quantum. It's if you like classic horror and practical effects, it's also really funny, but it's really good.
Well, I was gonna say, and you kind of find this out fairly early on, is the white people are the zombies. It's like, that's what it is. So it has a lot of commentary on that.
So good to finally see some more stuff, because growing up, all the indigenous content I ever got to see was filtered through APTN here in Canada, and it's like, so we have a government filter already on our content, so it's not necessarily always created bias for us in the ways we want.
Really cheesy. Very cheesy. Very good.
Okay, Rabbit's
I
doing. Oh, I'm sorry. Go on.
There's also the 90s indigenous film renaissance with like Smoke Signals and Dance Me Outside and Cowbell Highway. Like those, like even though those have like their flaws, they're still a big part of like this, like an important part of indigenous media, because they're the first movies that were made by indigenous storytellers. And as indigenous people, we have always been storytellers. Like that's for most nations, that was our biggest form of communication. So we have always been storytellers. So we always had this need to tell story. And I think the 90s films did a really good job of introducing the non-indigenous community to the way indigenous people, how we tell stories. Especially like Smoke Signals, like encompasses so much, like how a community, like I said, a community in grieving, and like the journey that like Victor goes on. I think really does a good. It's not like I said, it's not like the best movie ever, but to natives, it is one of the best movies ever. You literally grow up with it because it's one of the few it's like one of the first movies where we're represented, and we're the ones in control of the narrative in those 3 movies.
Sounds like a movie I need to watch.
Yeah, I recommend it.
Guys,
like one of our most famous.
Yeah.
One of our most famous Indians, Adam Beach.
Gods in chat says y'all should make a watch and reading list. Well, we are going to be dropping a bunch of links soon, so that's something. Rabbit's checking his audio, so hopefully he'll be joining us very shortly.
Many people to read.
one of my
What?
friends, he's a part of the Lumbee tribe. He does a thing on TikTok where he talks about native representation in media. Like that's his whole thing. So like
Oh wow.
I can post his link
Yeah, no,
while he talks about
drop it in the group
his
chat, and
favorite
I'll put in the Twitch
media.
chat right now. Like
Okay.
that's
Absolutely, go for these people if you go watch them. You want
support
want some
them.
knowledge.
Spread the links.
Or Prey. Like Prey was a really good representation of indigenous people.
Oh my god.
I don't know if you've watched.
I love
Prey.
that
I
film.
watched Prey. I liked Prey.
That
Prey
was
was not only that, it was just a
Yes.
good movie
It
overall.
had small issues, but overall it was amazing.
Yes. Like I had minor issues here and there, but overall, like I think they did a really good job like putting natives into that genre because before, like I said, especially in sci-fi and fantasy, natives have always been more romanticized in those kinds of films and are like either talk to animals or are like overly stereotyped. So like to have natives in a sci-fi movie where we're the ones directing the course of the narrative and actually like being like just a person who just happens to be native having to deal with aliens is huge. There's no like flowery speeches or there's no us talking to settlers about some romanticized, you know what I mean? Like there's no
The tropes are
over
avoided.
romanticization. Yes.
Yeah.
Over romanticization of like these tropes that have been in Hollywood for so long weren't there, especially like I said in sci-fi and in fantasy because I'm a big sci-fi fantasy fan and I love Star Trek to death. But one of my biggest critiques in Star Trek is the character Chakotay in Star Trek Voyager. He's Native American but his character is so poorly written. You can tell that one, the actor is not native. Two, the character of Chakotay is this oftentimes the stereotypical romanticization of what an indigenous person is, and there's no substance there. It's just all hollow. So we have this indigenous character in Star Trek, but it's not good.
Yeah, it's like a poorly represented. It's like a missed opportunity. This sort of
It's so bad.
I haven't seen Voyager. I would have to watch Voyager again. It's been a long time since I've seen Voyager, but
The Bajorans are a better representation of indigenous people.
Yeah,
Actual indigenous people.
I'm also a Star Trek nerd, and yeah. There's so many issues in Star Trek, but overall, I mean, I'm a huge nerd for it. I watch it. Yeah. Apart from that, like the last one I watched and we loved. I'm sorry, guilty pleasure. I loved Enterprise.
There's nothing wrong with Enterprise.
Yeah, I loved Enterprise. It was great.
Yeah. I mean,
Theme song every time.
I myself like sci-fi a lot, but I'm sort of, I don't know. Like the problem I have with sci-fi is I wish the genre did more, and it doesn't want to do more. I feel it plays it too safe, right? So, Clever said Enterprise was very bad.
Oh, it absolutely was.
Yeah.
But that's why I like that.
Like,
It's super cheesy.
yeah. So when I think of like, just again, this is more of a general thing about sci-fi. I wish sci-fi would do more things, like Prey. I liked Prey because it was like a combination of horror and sci-fi, and it was something new, and like not the concept, but again, the indigenous representation. It was like this positive thing. Like Viv and I watched that. We're just like gushing the whole time when we were watching that together. And I wish sci-fi would do more things like that. Like what like why can't there be a movie that looks at what would an indigenous future look like? Right? Like something positive.
I'm actually about to talk about that.
Yeah, like why not something positive where, forget all the, the tropes that some media falls into, but something completely new. the closest I think we've had to that was Black Panther with Wakanda. Despite its, the flaws and the issues with it, I think that's the closest we've seen to what that could sort of look like. Because I think like a futuristic sci-fi film where it's like this indigenous future where, the decolonization already happened, the land back already happened, the revolution already happened, and it's like this whole new look into like what could be. So I think that would be awesome to see. Unfortunately, we don't have it.
There's actually an RPG tabletop game that is like if colonialism never happened, like a native Wakanda. It's called Coyote and Crow, and it's written by natives, and it's like I said, it's a Dungeons and Dragons type tabletop where you get to play as a native, like as native characters. Like a native person can build a native character. Non-natives can play too, but it's basically set in a world where colonialism never happened, and it's a technologically advanced society, and there's magic, a bunch of other cool stuff.
That actually sounds really cool.
But it's a game made by native gamers, native storytellers. I can drop.
Yeah, please drop a link
that,
for that.
too.
I'll link that in the chat as well.
It's
Where
about
are
like
my
an
indigenous
uncolonized people.
futurisms?
Yeah.
I need them.
Like I can read you I have the thingy because I actually have the book. But
Nice.
It says a science fiction and fantasy tabletop RPG in the near future where the Americas were never colonized, created by a team of natives. So that's its synopsis. And it says a science fantasy role-playing game set in an uncolonized future.
See, that sounds like I'm sort of trying to get into like TTRPGs. And that sounds like something I would actually be fairly interested in because it's not your bog standard setting, right? The problem with a lot of tabletops is it's pretty much the same setting. Like whether you're doing D&D or Pathfinder, it's
this one is completely indigenous made. Everyone supports it.
Yeah,
so more games like this can be made.
I would say, you put the link in the group chat. I'll stick that in the Twitch chat and get some people to hopefully check it out.
I have that one ready on hand because I was just on their website earlier today looking at character stuff.
Do they have like a lot of supplemental books and stuff too?
They're coming out with some. Right now they just have the one game book.
The core book, I imagine.
The core book. Right now. So I'll put that in the. Like I said, I was just there today.
Rabbit has joined us. Welcome, Rabbit.
Are you picking me up? Am I audible?
Yes. I need to lower you a little bit, but that's on my end.
I already had that tab open.
Yeah. Do you want to give yourself a quick introduction?
What would you like to know? Rabbit Thoughts on Twitter. I'm Tale of Twin Rabbit here on, or is it Tale of Twin or Tale of Two? I think it's Twin Rabbit on Twitch, and also on YouTube I'm Twin Rabbit, and on Tumblr I think I finally got it to actually accept me as Twin Rabbit. So you should be able to find me on any of those options. But I do indigenous anthropology and history, and periodically I shout at weird racists on Twitter. So, all good times.
Clever said, Rabbit, ? I see the kind of people you let on your show.
That's right. and I don't know what y'all are on about. Voyager was flawless, and I will hear no criticism of the great and noble Janeway. How dare?
I critique of Janeway. Janeway's amazing.
That's right, she is.
She had her moments. B'Elanna Torres is my favorite, but Chakotay, as a native person, I want to scrap that and then rewrite his character. Like, just let me rewrite his character, and so it'll be good. Sometimes it was very frustrating. Very frustrating.
It was an interesting choice. I'm not sure where the face tat thing came from. I'm not entirely certain why they had him descended from the Olmec, but always for some reason referencing the Aztec. That was definitely a choice. Yeah, it was a thing.
It was very pan-indigenous, that's for sure.
It was.
Yep.
Very pan-indigenous. I think that's what bugged me the most because like my mom grew up in the pan-indigeneity time where like that was the thing, you know,
Hmm.
because like she was the first. My mom was the first generation that grew up in that time where you know you had the residential school generation, and then you had this generation that my mom didn't go. Her brothers went to residential school, but my mom didn't. So like she wasn't a part of that. Like, but she was still trying to connect. Even though she grew up in a native home, she was still trying to like find more natives to connect with. So there was still that like weird 1970s pan-indigeneity.
Oh yeah. So lots
Yeah,
of
so like
gourd necklaces and turquoise.
yeah, so like I feel like Chakotay he's that character. He's that like 1960s, 1970s. Like he was written for that generation of natives who were they were just so like hungry for indigenous representation on the screen that Chakotay was like good. He was good for that
Yeah,
time.
yeah, and clever. Yes, you are correct. I did find it interesting that within literally the first episode, he's perfectly fine with just joining right back on the Federation. That those brown people, they civilize fast. You just got to get the right clothes on us. It's
I
amazing,
know. I'm like, that's so disappointing, Chakotay.
right? Like he should have been the leader of the rebellion. What the hell?
I know.
You
I was very
disappoint me.
disappointed. I agree. Like I said, the Bajorans. I find more kinship with the Bajorans as an indigenous person than I ever did with Chakotay. They're like indigenous.
That's fair.
That's another thing in media is this like natives. So we don't have a lot of representation in media. We do this native coding thing where we project indigeneity. If you're like the slightest bit like indigenous coded, you're like, oh, you're native. We're adopting.
It's the same
We're
with
adopting
stories
this.
and story elements.
Yeah, like we're adopting you as native because you have like they're native coded. So like because we don't have so much good representation in media, there's that aspect of it too. Oh, that person's native. No, they're not.
Yeah, it's fine. It's fine. They're ours now. You're not allowed.
Yep.
I'm actually a big fan of the Ferengi personally. If you go for hardcore trickster tales, like the DS9 Ferengi are right there. I know they tried to make them the villains for next gen, which did not sell because they didn't work. But yeah,
They do give off coyote vibes.
the DS9
Or
Ferengi
Raven.
are I kind of adore them. They so do.
They give
Especially
very much giving coyote raven vibes. I get that, yeah.
Yeah. They're my kind of people. I don't know that I'd want to hang out with them for an extended period, but from a
No.
distance, very entertaining.
Yes. Very much. I think more coyote.
This has
But
now
yeah,
become
I
a
see
Star
that.
Trek panel.
Well, look, just
That's what
because we're
happens when you get nerds in
identifying
a room.
and
Nerds in
we're
a room.
identifying native truths, it's fine. Personally,
Again,
I think a great
storytelling.
yeah, I think a great indigenous story is My Big Fat Greek Wedding.
Whoa, that's a
Am I
that's a bomb.
That's what I'm saying.
It's the hot takes from Rabbit.
If you have seen that movie, you have met at least one native family. This has happened. What do you mean you
That's
don't eat meat?
true.
Fine, we'll have lamb.
Yeah, that's a
Okay.
Danae family. A Danae
So
grandma.
much.
You don't eat meat. You're gonna eat the sheep. If
It's
you
it's
like it
like
or not.
it's like over here. It's like you eat salmon. You don't eat salmon. What are you
Yeah.
doing?
That's my family. What do you mean you don't eat fish? That's not the same.
I was gonna say we were covering the well, now it's sort of become like I joked, it's a Star Trek panel. But we were just to bring Rabbit up to speed. We covered some like the revolutionary stuff earlier. Andrea went on explain like in her family and her mother's an activist and stuff like that. And then we sort of got into like the representation and media thing, and earlier we were like talking about reservation dogs a little bit because yeah, I'm trying to focus more on the positive stuff with that.
Yeah.
And I would love to hear your thoughts about reservation dogs.
I think it's
Oh my
hilarious.
God.
I like yeah, I like that
But yeah,
it's got enough
I
content
think we
from
covered pretty much like all the stones for. Well, I really didn't talk about like indigenous music. Like that's really taken to in the last couple years as well. Like not just like native movies and TV, but native music has gotten more mainstream. Like with A Tribe Called Red.
yeah, they're getting really popular, which I did not expect.
Naughty Res Boys. Who else?
Savage fan?
Crystal Lightning. I'm trying to
I've
think.
Yeah,
even
that music was
Frank
played.
Wong.
what was it?
Like native music is native hip hop or pop music or dance hall music has gotten big.
I'll stick some of those in
Um,
the chat.
It
like
really does get
Northern
you
Creek.
hyped up to block a vote. I say that
Well-
because a couple years back, over here in you know, West Coast, BC, and all that, when we were all doing that solidarity or whatever, that stuff was playing constantly. I mean, it was great. I loved it. I loved every second of it. It would always get me pumped up to like another action or another, just anything really. I'd be tired. I got no sleep. I already did this, and I was like, I gotta go.
Kind of gets the heart going. Some of the music. I'm just dropping a bunch of links in chat now for some of the bands named.
I found a native blues band that was really good. And I'm trying to remember who it was.
If you remember, I'll throw it in chat because I just want everyone to like check this stuff out and try to support it. Oh, that's right. The Tribe Called Red. They renamed themselves the Hallucination. The Hallucination.
They did?
Yeah,
Yeah.
that's what's
they-
popping up here on
that's-
YouTube. Interesting. Wonder why they rebranded.
No idea. But yeah, yeah, essentially what Venus said, that we talked about the depressing stuff earlier, so try to cheer ourselves up a bit.
Yeah. Well, not too much into the depressing stuff. I want to avoid that.
Yeah.
But that's why I got
I mean,
on.
there's so many positive things I can think about with just last couple years, especially. It's been wild seeing just so many positive things lately.
Yeah, like Reservation
That-
Dogs. That's more of a media thing, to be fair.
Yeah, but it's still huge because it's like, what else can I point to is be like, oh yeah, there's my community's humor right there on the TV.
Yeah. What other I guess I'm sort of like just trying to like wing it at this point. Like, what other stuff does anyone want to discuss specifically? Any specific
Did anybody have any,
topics?
did anybody have any like cultural questions? Like,
Does anyone in chat have cultural questions? I'm asking people now.
Ha, there
I
you go.
always ask, like, do you have an ask the native? Like, this is your chance.
Yeah. Okay, well, I guess while I wait till someone in chat says something, I have a question. So I remember, and this is related to reservation dogs. The thing with the owl, they block out the owl's eyes. Do you want to touch on like why that is, just for like as like
Yeah.
a general thing? Okay.
Yeah, so in certain tribes, certain animals are either considered like secret or taboo. Depending on your tribe and your nation, certain animals will have certain needs or medicine that they carry. So, like for certain tribes, the owl is a bad thing. It's not a good omen. So they'll try. So no owls, no owl pictures or representation of owls are allowed in the house. For my people, we don't have that. Like an owl isn't a bad omen for my people, so we don't have that. But I'm not allowed to eat certain animals because it's taboo against my clan. So as a Raven clan person, I can't eat a bear. I can't eat bears because they're a part of my clan system. So like, or frogs, I can't eat a frog because they're considered a mythical being to my people. So each tribe, each nation, they have different rules when it comes to animals, certain animals. And I was just one of them. They bring bad medicine.
Well, I suppose I've learned something new today in that regard. Let me see if we have any no questions in chat. God says, what's going on with language preservation and the role it plays in indigenous nations?
I'm doing nations, not just my nations, but the Haida Nation. Right now, we're doing land camps and immersion schools. So a lot of nations are tribal schools are now incorporating language into the curriculum to try to save our languages. The Haida Nation, Haida Tlingit Nation, we are doing also, like I said, language camps, which are more intense language training. That are not the same thing as like the immersion schools where like you have kids learning the language. And I know that other nations are doing that too. The Dene Nation, who has the highest speaking concentration of indigenous speakers, so doing incorporating with immersion camps and things like that. When it comes to its connection to like things like land back and indigenous rights, indigenous sovereignty, it's a big point because the names that we're using for the land, right, our connection to the land, the things that we call where you're living in the land, like in the land or the places you go to, no longer have indigenous names, and that's a big deal. So even just reclaiming the indigenous names for rivers, lakes, mountains, places is a huge deal. That's a part of land back too. Having that connection back to connecting the land back to the original people is huge. That's, like I said, that's a huge part of what land back means. It's reclaiming the actual name. Like Mount Denali is really Mount Pocols. Or we have indigenous towns right here in the Midwest. Like we have places named after indigenous people or indigenous words, but there's no connection. There's no education to why things are called what they're called. So it's also that educational aspect of teaching non-indigenous people why things are named these things, because that is the indigenous word for the land. That's the indigenous word for that mountain or that river or whatever. So I think part of reclaiming language is one, teaching indigenous people our language. I'm not a speaker of my language. My grandmother was the last person in my family to speak Chinook and Haida. So that is something that I am working on. So like that's a part of my own decolonization. So like as a Native person, I'm trying to decolonize myself by learning my language. I am trying to introduce Indigenous language to a younger generation so that it's preserved. And 3, I'm also trying to introduce Indigenous names to the land so that way that connection between Indigenous people and the land isn't broken. And people, that's another way for people to recognize that they're on stolen land and their correct name for Indigenous places. Like, because it's not the Columbia, it's not Elizabeth. You know what I mean? It's not named after these dead queens and kings. They have proper names, but they were named thousands of years before it was named after Queen Elizabeth or whatever. So that's my thing on language. Yeah.
The language restoration programs are also an issue for pushing back against this weird sort of new primitivism that is sweeping the nation. It's a brand new fashion. Y'all go out and try it yourselves. But they'll find like stories that have been preserved but completely stripped of their context. And one of my favorite examples of that is there is a fairly famous Cherokee story called Thunderfinger. And it's, if you just read it straight off as translated, it's nonsense. Thunderfinger pointed downward and turned the rock into an owl, and then the owl flew away, and now because of that the water no longer comes from the old man, now it comes from the serpent. And you're like, what is this? This makes no sense. It's a map story. If you read it in Cherokee and you're standing in roughly the location that it's assuming you're standing in, it's a way to find a well. But because that language was suppressed and it just got translated raw, it sounds like total gibberish. So now we've got this noble savage bullshit about, oh, they didn't really understand how things worked. I mean, look at the stories they tell. They're just nonsense. They don't even connect to anything. So yeah, language restoration is also
huge. Like as an Indigenous storyteller, like you brought up a great point, like as an Indigenous storyteller and a person who's gone through their apprenticeship to being a storyteller, like that's a huge deal, a huge problem that you brought up, because we do have people out here like telling these stories, right? And they're not telling the full story, because a lot of our stories were meant to be told over long periods of time, not in short snippets like that. And like you said, the feel of the story isn't so that they're just they're not myths in the traditional sense of like Greek myths or Roman myths or anything like that. Like our stories were meant to teach something. So like when I tell the story about like how we got salmon or whatever, like that story was meant to talk about how our connection to the salmon is vital. Like it's not like we're not out here there is a spiritual aspect to it though that I don't want to dismiss. There is a spiritual aspect to Indigenous storytelling that is connected to the narrative of the storytelling, but it's not the only thing. Like there's a purpose for our stories. Like we learned how to hunt and fish by watching bear hunt and fish. We learned to forage berries from watching bear as well. Bear taught us where the berries were. So we honor bear by telling bear stories, because bear showed us what berries were good. That's where we learned where to forage. So people are like, oh, like you believe like this bear talked to you. Like that's not the point. The point is that we had a relationship with the land, and we watched bear, and bear was the teacher that taught us where the berries were. So that way we knew what berries to eat. That's the point of the story. It's not the point that the bear is talking or the bear had powers. Like that's not the point. The point is that the bear told us where the berries were. And there's a lack of Indigenous storytellers out here telling our traditional stories the way they're supposed to be told. And I think that's an art that needs to come back, for sure.
That being said, there are several different tribes who pretty much as soon as they can get any money together at all, they will start setting up a language program of some sort. If there is enough native speakers for them to get a good sense of how the language was structured. Because like if you've only got one or two native speakers, it's really hard because they might not know very much of the vocabulary, or it may have been something they learned when they were a kid, which means they basically have a kid's way of speaking, which doesn't necessarily give you enough information. Like the Lakota are a good example. You would interact using a different vocabulary depending on if you were talking to a family member versus if you were talking to a stranger. And so there were technically two separate languages, and you wouldn't necessarily know that if you're talking to someone who only learned Lakota from their family. They wouldn't know the stranger dialect. They would only know the family dialect. So that's a whole section of the language that then is cut off. Now, with Lakota specifically, they have enough native speakers that they know what the other dialects were. But there are other tribes where they don't. We don't know if they had, 5 or 6 different words for the same thing, depending on the situation.
That's true.
But yeah, just to add to the point, yeah, like storytelling and language is a huge deal, and it is a primary piece of land back, which it kind of gets me into the problem of like people thinking that land back is we're just gonna buy Oklahoma and then march white people to the sea. It's like, come on. There's a lot going on there that is really weird, but most importantly, that's not what land back has ever meant. It's you're talking about something that's, a century old at this point or more. It's there's a much more developed philosophy there.
Yeah,
I was
a
gonna say,
little bit.
go on.
Go ahead.
Oh, I was gonna say in the beginning, somewhat towards the beginning of my stream, before we got into this like panel stuff, I did play a video on land back, and then I read, out of the print edition of the Red Deal, and they covered it in like in a modern sense, mostly for did that mostly for context with the VOD. So if people are watching down the road, there's no
Right.
like confusing it or misinterpreting it. So sort of did that in the beginning just to like preface this whole panel, since land back has been brought up quite a few times already. That way viewers know exactly what it is and what it is not.
Yeah, and
Well,
we're
and
gonna bring it up constantly because it's connected to literally everything.
Yes.
Well, and it takes slightly different forms depending on which tribal group you're talking about. Like the Caribbean tribal groups, which is where my primary family traces from, they have kind of a different set of problems to deal with because like the island chains themselves were almost entirely Taino and Kalinago, also known as the Carib, which just means people eaters. So they changed their name, not surprising. But the Kalinago were mostly the southern tribes and the Taino were mostly the northern tribes. So what we now think of as Cuba, which is completely separate from Puerto Rico, which is completely separate from uh, any of the other islands. They wouldn't have thought of it that way in the first place. But now some of them have to deal with the Dutch, some of them have to deal with the British, some of them have to deal with the French. So even there, like land back for them is even more complicated because depending on which island you're standing on, you might be talking to a completely different European power.
Exactly, especially when you take it into the international perspective, when you get into like the global south and just other countries as a whole. Like you think of like New Zealand, for example. It's a whole different ball game over there as well for the Maui.
Australia too with Aboriginal
Yeah,
people.
Australia.
The way Australia and New Zealand have been approaching like just preserving like sacred sites has been huge, and I wish that we would do more like what they're doing in Australia for protecting their indigenous sites, because they're actually getting more indigenous oversight with sacred sites in Australia. And that is something that we really need to work on here in the United States, is getting more indigenous oversight. We should
Well,
be
I
the
mean,
ones in charge of our sacred sites.
we do
Not-
finally have a native running the Department of the Interior. It only took 200 years.
Oh yeah, Auntie Deb, yeah. Like she's great, but but like since like I read a lot of her reports since I'm, like I said, I'm in the archaeology program. And we're also, like, one of my things is we're trying to create sites that, like I said, are run, like the intellectual property of the sites is ran by the Native nations
Mhm.
that on the sites. So Deb does want to do that, but it's just that she has so many projects right now that she needs other people to step in and really do the organizing around that, so that way she can build to what they're doing in New Zealand, in Australia, because it's taken a really long time to get to that point in Australia and New Zealand, because they've had so many people like Deb in positions of power that they're able to build that. We don't have that here in the United States. We have Deb, yeah, for sure, but we need more people other than just Deb.
Oh, yeah.
Like
need
more
a whole
public
bunch.
pressure is basically
Yeah.
what he's saying. Yeah, more. That way, with Deb in the position that she is, if there was enough organizing and public pressure around it, then maybe some good can come up of that. You know, hopefully, maybe some sort of act gets passed that preserves stuff.
Yeah, I know that in Canada too, they're thinking about it with a lot of First Nations, especially like on the West Coast. But again, the Canadian government is also very frustrating to work with when it
Oh,
comes to
yeah.
historical sites.
Yeah, Canada's preservation, for those of you playing along at home, Canada's preservation laws are actually rated as some of the worst in the world.
Yeah,
They
are
have
horrible.
horrible preservation
Horrible.
laws.
They make me cry. That's how bad they are. They're as a not even if I wasn't an Indigenous person, even if I completely remove myself, like, but I can't. But you know what I mean? Like, even if I was just an anthropologist and an archaeologist, it's still horrifying. Like, I don't know how an anthropologist and an archaeologist can sit there and look at the laws and go, "Oh, this is good," like, because it's not.
I would argue the state here in Canada does not have preservation laws. They have preservation fines.
Yeah, that's fair.
Viv and I have talked about
Okay.
some of that stuff in the past, and like I said, even as like an outsider looking in, it is depressing. It's yeah, that's the best way to sum it up. It's depressing that they don't do anything at all, not even a bare minimum.
This colonial nonsense, like none of it even makes any sense. It's like look at our families. So your brother has status, but you don't have status. For what reason? Your mom's indigenous, your dad's not indigenous, you're not indigenous, or you are. God damn it.
You got to marry the right people. That's the secret.
Blood quantum, the worst invention ever.
Gotta smash the blood quantums.
Yes, no more blood quantum. Blood quantum ruin everything, and like my daughter. So, like my daughter, for instance, she is Chinook, she is Haida, and her dad is Lakota and Ojibwe, right? But she barely makes the cut to be enrolled. She has she barely makes it, even though her grandfather is Indigenous, her grandmother is Indigenous, I'm Indigenous. Being Native.
I have a friend who's, I'm trying to remember how this worked out. His daughter the father is from a matriarchal tribe. Mother is from a patriarchal tribe. So unless she's formally adopted by one of the existing clans, she is not anything. However, she is full-blood native. So she is literally 100% Indian. That's it. she has no technical like affiliation. I believe she has since been adopted by his family, if I remember correctly. But yeah, for the first several years of her life, she was just Indian, which I would love to see the paperwork on that, because you're supposed to have some sort of tribal affiliation in order to enroll. But yeah, that's how
Yeah.
entirely screwed up the blood quantum system is. You can literally be 100% whatever. It's like, okay,
It doesn't
Yeah,
matter because
I have multiple friends who are like 100% native, and it's like no status, no recognition, nothing. It's like, and yet they go through their whole life dealing with the racism and everything, but they don't even get a card to show for it.
yeah.
It's like a horrible limbo to be in.
Oh, federal recognition. Oh, that is a hornet's nest. Oof.
my tribe's not federally recognized.
Abolish
Just
federal
mention.
recognition, let our
Yes.
nations and tribes decide it for ourselves.
Yeah, I
Yeah.
agree.
Let the nations, decide who is indigenous and who isn't. That's like the only way to handle it. It shouldn't be some sort of government doing that.
The problem with
I
oh, go ahead.
myself, I'm non-status indigenous diaspora, and it's like saying that it's like doesn't give any literal context to my family makeup or anything like that. Like you would know that, like, oh yeah, my mom's indigenous. It's like, and I'm being cremated. It's like my mom's indigenous, so I'm indigenous, and yeah. Yeah, but except I'm not recognized by the state, but I'm recognized by indigenous peoples and community and whatnot. It's like, what can you do?
Well, and for
Yeah.
people that are in my situation, like referring back to the Caribbean, there are certain Taino branches that are technically recognized, but they have no status. And that's because Puerto Rico is a territory and not a state. But that's only the Taino. So if you're Kalinago or any of the other tribes in the Caribbean, you have no recognition at all, because those are not American tribes. Those are something else, which is where we run into the disenrollment problem. Because I don't know if y'all knew, but the United States is not a native creation. It's those borders were not there. So this whole like Mexican tribe, Canadian tribe, Caribbean tribe division did not exist. It was completely unrelated. So the federal government
Yeah.
saying we only recognize tribes within our borders, even to begin with, is just incredibly limited, because there were plenty of like southern border tribes that straddled the Rio Grande. They're still there. The Apache, there's Apache in Mexico, there's Apache in Texas. Like there's other tribes that were just on the other side of the mountain range. They're basically US tribes, but they have no recognition because that's not in the US. Well, they were there when you showed up. It's not their fault you decided to carve out a state.
It's the whole issue with borders too. Just divides everybody. God
I'm
says
being harassed
gasp.
by I'm being harassed by a cat.
Uh-oh. Is it
Well,
yelling at you for food?
No, doing the silent stare. Yeah.
Oh, I love it when cats do that.
Just right on my periphery. It's absolutely a I know you can see me.
Yep, I'm
I'm
guilt
wet. I'll wait.
tripping you.
I'll wait. You can see me.
Wants that attention.
Well, he's needy. What are you gonna do?
That's my cat in a nutshell. So I figure, do you have to like head off, Andrea, or do you still have a bit of time? Because I did want to like try to cover a little bit of ICWA and maybe put some resources in chat and then like wrap up. How does everyone feel about that? Or
I'm golden.
Me too. I felt like we
both good? Everyone?
yeah, no.
Okay.
Got to talk a little bit about a few things, so that was good.
Yeah. Well, again, the ICWA
Actually,
stuff. What?
I can drop a whole bunch of these about ICWA. I could drop something
Please
that my friend
do.
Albert,
I'm also going to be
that
dropping.
my friend Albert Bender just wrote about ICWA.
I'm familiar with
Um,
Albert Bender.
Yeah,
A little
he's-
bit. A little
he's
bit.
amazing. Uncle Al.
Where
he's fun.
is?
But he's written a lot about ICWA. But the Supreme Court is going to be considering reviewing ICWA soon. And what those who don't know what ICWA is, just a quick rundown of what ICWA is. ICWA is the law that was created to protect Indigenous children from being removed from their native homes and placed with non-Indigenous people. I will tell them I need to eat. Don't worry about me eating. I promise I'll eat. You're my daughter.
Yeah.
Anyways.
It's adorable.
But anyway, so back in the 60s, ever since residential schools, and before residential schools, the U.S. government has been stealing Native kids, and it's something that hasn't ended. So since the United States likes to steal Indigenous children, the law was created to protect Indigenous children, to make sure that only Indigenous families, if a child is removed from their home, that Indigenous families will be the first, or the tribe will be the first to be able to adopt or foster Native kids. And ICWA has been under fire. This isn't the first time that ICWA has been under fire from the Supreme Court or the United States government. They've been trying to get rid of ICWA since ICWA has been instated, because Native kids are a commodity. They are a selling point, because people are like, oh, if I have a Native kid, I have this exotic child now. Yeah, they're like a collector's item. So everyone knows that a lot of adoption is money driven. So having Indigenous kids being up for adoption creates revenue is another thing. So it will also stop people from monetizing on Indigenous youth as well, like that. So I could talk about, like, talking about ICWA could take a whole nother
a whole panel in itself.
Yeah, like that could be a whole talk within itself. It's just talking about the ins and outs of ICWA and the history of ICWA. And like I said, it goes back even before residential schools, the United States targeting Indigenous children and women. So that was like the two things that the like colonizers targeted first, was Indigenous women, children, and Two-Spirits. So the violence has always been here against Native kids. So then it was the residential schools, then it was the scoop. There's even certain states where you could buy, like one of my friends, she's Apache, her grandmother was actually one of the kids that was bought. Like her grandmother has like a receipt for her adoption. It was an adoption. She was literally sold to a family, like a receipt, like $10 for an Indian kid, I think, is what her grandmother's receipt, her adoption receipt was. $10 for an Indian kid, so that you can reform the Indian child. So like, we have all these lost generations now because of residential schools and the United States government scooping up Native kids. And like I said, that's why it was made. It was made to stop Native kids from being scooped up. The problem is that it hasn't stopped. There's still states like South Dakota, North Dakota, Montana, Oregon, Washington, New Mexico, Arizona. Those are Colorado, Wyoming. Those are the states that have a lot of Native kids in foster care, because Native, and also this also happens in Canada too, where Native women will go into the hospital to give birth for their kids, and the hospitals will flag that mom for any little discrepancy or anything, and take that kid away from the mom. So like, oh, the mom, look, she looks like she's like this, or based on poverty or whatever. Like, states come up with anything you can possibly imagine to try to take these kids out of their homes. I'm not saying that there's not instances where, you know, kids do need to be removed from homes because of substance abuse or violence or whatever, but a lot of times these kids are being taken away from the homes just so that way they can get their numbers higher for having Native kids removed from the homes, because they get money, right?
Right.
So a lot of ICWA cases, a lot of people don't know, like there's so many ICWA cases. And my friend Kara Boyd, she's a lawyer in North Carolina, and she actually helped reestablish ICWA law and help rewrite ICWA law. And she's one of the few people who are organizing and raising awareness about what the Supreme Court's about to do with ICWA. And like I said, I'll drop a whole bunch of links. There's other Native Indigenous activists talking about it on TikTok, and have YouTube videos about it. And I'll post some helpful articles about like what exactly ICWA is, how ICWA works, and why it was written in the first place.
Absolutely, because the reason why, like, I even bring it up, and like, I'm not saying I'll get into the weeds of all the horrible stuff, but like, you know, myself and like other comrades who are like hanging out in the chat, and some other streamers, we've been trying to like bring more awareness to it. You know, sending out tweets like ICWA, defend ICWA, as well as resources. Like, I just dropped a link to some resources by another Indigenous activist I've been recently following, because I didn't know about them until looking into the ICWA stuff. And it's something that I feel needs to be amplified as loud as possible. But not only that, it needs to be amplified with like resources on how people could you know, get involved to defend it. Like, and granted, like, I've heard many times from people, like, it's not perfect. ICWA's not perfect, but like, if it gets defeated, like, the fallout is horrific. Like, if it got like repealed or whatever. But yeah, I mean, if you have a ton of resources, shoot them in the group chat, and I'll just drop them in the stream chat, and hopefully get some people hanging out to like spread them and post about them and tell their friends about them, because that is extremely important, you know.
One thing that people can do from a direct action position is find out, because like, I don't know every person's local area, but if you get a hold of the adoption agencies in your local area, ask them what their ICWA policy is. And if they either say they don't know, or, you know, they start asking you a lot of questions, well, that's a pretty good warning sign. And collect those names, as in get the organizations that are doing these adoptions that either didn't know what ICWA was, or that maybe weren't necessarily conforming to it. And there are a couple of different legal organizations. The Lakota Law Project is one that's working on it right now. They've actually been putting out some videos talking about ICWA, but there are several different organizations, even getting a hold of your local tribe, because most states have some sort of tribal office, especially if they have a reservation of any kind, and let them know, okay, I contacted these adoption organizations, and they didn't even know what ICWA was, or they are not seemingly informed on or whatever, because that gives them a database to demonstrate this is a problem that we need to be discussing. Like the actual Supreme Court testimony for ICWA was loathsome. Like the lawyer who was representing the family that's trying to adopt this kid out, literally, he stood up and said, "Your Honors, do you have any idea how much it would cost us if we had to actually enforce ICWA in the state of Texas?" That's like his first argument was it's about money. So they're
Yeah.
they're trying to sell it in the press as a, good Christian values, and we care about the kids so darn much. You wouldn't believe how much we care. That's not what their lawyer said. What their lawyer said was it's about money. So we know what it's about. They were obvious about it.
Yeah.
It's a matter of like piercing through that narrative. Another bit of like interpersonal is when you see people talking about ICWA, if they do, don't let them have the conversation stray into, well, but what if this family, no, it's not. I don't care if they are the nicest people on the planet. They have a lawyer who literally said, we are buying children. So
Yeah.
that undercuts the good person narrative right there. If they didn't believe that, then their lawyer would not have been able to say it. So,
Yeah, I just dropped a link for lakotalaw.org, and then they have a section on the website about taking actions. So hopefully folks will look at that and again spread that. And
Yeah, that's a good read. That's a good one.
yeah, it's
IDM on those types of people is predicated on the idea that we can't take care of our people.
yeah,
And
that was
we should be making the decisions with our people.
well, and that was the Veronica case, which not as many people are referencing that when they talk about this case, which is a concern on its own. The actual Veronica case is what opened the door. In 2011, this guy tried to get custody of his daughter, and the court said that men are not the keepers of the children in native tribes. Therefore, he had no claim. That was their decision. They never said who did have the right. So, like grandparents, mom, the rest of the family, they just left that door open. Who has the right to claim a native child? They didn't say. So this case is answering that question, and they might decide the state. The state is the one who has the right to decide who claims a native child. And if that's it, then native kids are property. They are federal territory, and that's disgusting.
it's fucking
Yep,
awful.
gonna be owned by the state.
I just dropped
Yep.
a few links. A link to Show Me Your Mask, which again, that's the indigenous activist who's been, at least on their channel, talking about ICWA quite a bit. That's where my first link of resources comes from, and I just linked an article from Andrea regarding Albert Bender's article.
Excellent.
So yeah, and I mean, if anyone has any more resources, I can always link that. And I urge people watching this, or people who, and when I put this up as a VOD on my channel, I'm going to have all these links, in the video description, but, like, I urge people to actually look at this stuff. Like, don't just take it and bookmark it, like, actually read about it. Read the links, look at the resources that are available, and spread them, because there just is not enough. And I know I'm repeating myself, but I can't stress it enough. There's not enough of a magnifying glass on this. This sort of stuff's not being amplified enough. And if people who want to call themselves revolutionaries and want to call themselves communists really want to be that thing, well, then this is the opportunity to step up to the plate and start supporting these things in mass, including orgs as well, despite how flawed some of these orgs and parties are in this country, they also need to step up to the plate with this stuff. We need more articles being written. We just need a whole lot more. And that's sort of like another motivating factor for doing this sort of panel, is just like to give people. And granted, it's not like a huge platform. It's, you know, I only have like seven or eight people hanging out, but like to try to at least do something to like allow people to like put their voices out there. And like I'm very thankful and appreciative for everyone on this panel for taking the time to like hang out, talk, share their experiences. I just hope like I said, my goal is I hope people look at these resources and follow them and amplify them and share them and learn. The Communist Party of China started out with only 13 people, I think. Yeah, it's a very small amount. Although we talk might be we need a new Communist Party of some sort. Because there's issues with all of them.
Especially here in Canada. Oh my god, don't get me started. That's a topic for another day.
I was gonna say, let's open that can of worms.
Oh boy.
Oh no, I have so much to say, but
Yeah.
that we can save that for another thing.
But
Yeah.
I mean, I'm gonna continue streaming, but like unless everyone wants to like maybe continue the conversation more, I'm open to that. Or if you just want to like sort of close it out here, or if anyone has any lasting thoughts or remarks on some of the stuff we discussed, because I don't want to like take up too much people's time. So it all depends on the three of you. Like, what do you want to do? No pressure. I mean,
I'm going to head out because my daughter is right. I need to eat
okay.
because she knows that I'm
Yeah.
hungry.
Do you have anything you want to plug before you go? Social media, drop links for that or anything?
Not really. But
Okay.
I will be dropping a bunch of things in the chat for you.
Okay, and I'll be putting those in my
Like,
chat.
Yeah, and then if you ever need like another discussion or whatever, I'm open to that. That's fine.
Okay.
Well, thank you for having me and listening. Like I said, a lot of these topics really do need like their own like individual discussion
But-
because like a lot of them don't have. There's like touch and go on them. It's hard to like condense so much
Yeah,
information down.
I agree 100%.
But I think we did a good job. So
Yeah, I
yeah.
think, yeah, and thank you again. Like, I wouldn't be able to do this without, fellow comrades willing to come on and talk. So, it's very much appreciated, Andrea.
No worries.
All right. I'll catch you later, and since you're open to maybe doing this sort of thing down the road, maybe down the road, a bit, we'll if there's like a specific topic you want to discuss or something, maybe we can work something out and have an entire thing focus on that one topic, and it'll be a little more fleshed out and a little more detailed.
That'd be good.
Okay. You take care.
You guys have a good night too.
You too.